me, Christopher. Lead a compact dev team at a mid-tier tech company that actually functions. For a long stretch, everything lined up: interesting problems, fair pay, and a crew that knew what it was doing. We operated with almost no friction. Ron was our senior, pushing 60, writing code since before I touched a keyboard. He'd lived through every corporate revolution and trusted none of them. Dry as hell, brutally honest, but when it came to code, the guy was surgical. If something looked unsolvable, you brought it to him. He'd insult your approach, rewrite it in minutes, and move on. Then there was Nathaniel, the new guy. Quick learner, motivated, always trying to absorb everything he could. We all kind of took him under our wing. Ron would grill him on fundamentals. I'd help him navigate the project architecture. He was genuinely passionate about the work, which was refreshing. Adam was our sysadmin, the quiet one. He'd sit in the corner with his headphones on, and you wouldn't hear a peep from him for days. But our servers never went down. Our network was flawless. He was a silent guardian, a watchful protector, a dark knight of the server rack. And then there was Veronica, our UI/UX designer. Sharp, talented, and had zero tolerance for nonsense. She was the only woman on our immediate team, and it was never an issue for anyone. We respected her because her designs were clean, intuitive, and always delivered on time. She respected us because we built what she designed without butchering it. It was a relationship based entirely on professional competence. Perfect. Our old boss was a guy named Frank. He was a simple man. His management philosophy was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. As long as our project metrics were green and we hit our deadlines, he left us completely alone. We loved him for it. We had our own ecosystem, our own inside jokes. We'd grab lunch together, talk about video games, cars, whatever. Work felt less like a job and more like a clubhouse for people who were good at what they did. Then Frank announced his retirement. We threw him a great party, wished him well, and then the speculation started. Who would replace him? We all hoped for an internal promotion, maybe me, maybe Ron, if he could be bothered. An email went out from corporate a few weeks later, introducing our new department head, Isabel. Her bio was attached. It was a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords, talked a lot about fostering inclusive dialogues, driving synergetic innovation, and actualizing a new paradigm of workplace equity. Not a lot in there about shipping product or managing technical debt. Ron read the email, made a noise that was halfway between a laugh and a groan, and went back to his code. That was the first red flag. Isabel's first day arrived. She called a mandatory team meeting first thing in the morning. She walked in with a strained corporate smile plastered on her face. The speech she gave was just like her email bio, but in person. It was a 15-minute word salad of the latest corporate-approved phrases. She talked about her vision for the team, which involved deconstructing outdated hierarchies and centering marginalized voices. I remember looking at Adam, who looked like he wanted to physically phase through his chair. Nathaniel was trying to look engaged, nodding along. Ron was staring at a fixed point on the ceiling, completely zoned out. Veronica had her professional face on, neutral and unreadable. I just tried to look like a supportive team lead, but my mind was racing. None of what she said had anything to do with our actual jobs. The changes started small. First, she insisted on a daily check-in meeting every morning. We weren't just supposed to talk about our work blockers. We had to go around the circle and share how we were feeling today. Adam, our quiet sysadmin, looked like he was being waterboarded every time it was his turn. He'd just mumble "fine" and look down at the table. Isabel would push him. "Just fine, Adam. Can you unpack that for us?" It was excruciating to watch. Then she started renaming things. Our main project repository, codenamed Project Colossus for years, was renamed to the Harmony Initiative. Our team group chat, simply called Dev Team, became the Innovation Circle. It was all so performative and pointless. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. About a month into her reign, she called me into her office. She told me she was concerned about the team's culture, said it felt very male-dominated and unwelcoming. I was confused. I mentioned that we had Veronica and that everyone seemed to get along great. She gave me a condescending smile, explained that having a woman on the team wasn't enough. The culture itself was the problem. It was too focused on merit and technical skill, which she claimed were concepts used to exclude people. I didn't even know how to respond to that. Our entire profession is based on merit and skill. She said we needed to focus more on soft skills and emotional intelligence. Then came the big one. An email landed in our inboxes. Subject: Mandatory Workshop, Unpacking Toxic Masculinity in the Workplace. It was scheduled for a Friday afternoon for 3 hours. Attendance was mandatory for all male members of the team. The email specifically noted, "Veronica is exempt from this training." The air in the office went cold. For the first time, it wasn't just some silly corporate nonsense. This felt targeted. This felt personal and accusatory. Nathaniel came over to my desk, looking worried. He asked if this was normal. I told him I had no idea. Ron just shook his head and muttered something about finding a new job. I thought he was joking at the time. The day of the workshop was grim. We all filed into a conference room. Isabel was there, along with a facilitator she had hired. The facilitator was one of her friends, a consultant who seemed to specialize in this stuff. For 3 hours, we were subjected to a lecture. We were told that things like being competitive, bottling up emotions, and valuing logic over feelings were all signs of toxic masculinity. We were apparently contributing to a hostile environment just by existing. The facilitator put up slides with vague, uncited statistics. There was a privilege walk exercise that was deeply uncomfortable. I spent the whole time just trying to stay quiet and get through it. But Ron, being Ron, couldn't help himself. During the Q&A, he raised his hand. He asked the facilitator how, specifically, his 30 years of experience writing stable, efficient code was a product of privilege. He wasn't aggressive, just genuinely asking for a logical connection. The facilitator got flustered. Isabel jumped in immediately. She told Ron that his question itself was an example of defensive posturing and a refusal to engage with the material. She said he was trying to derail the conversation with logic instead of listening with empathy. So, logic was now the enemy. Ron just leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and didn't say another word for the rest of the session. The 4 of us walked out of that room feeling utterly demoralized. It was like we had just been collectively punished for something we didn't do. Our motivation was at an all-time low. The following Monday, Veronica came to my desk. She closed the door to my office. She told me she had heard about the workshop from a friend in another department. She said it was the most unprofessional and insulting thing she'd ever heard of a manager doing. She told me she wanted me to know that she thought it was ridiculous and that none of us deserved that. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot. It confirmed that this wasn't about men versus women. It was about sanity versus ideology. Veronica was on the side of sanity. Things got worse from there, especially with our main project. We were working on a major platform upgrade. It was the company's flagship product. High stakes, tight deadline, the kind of project our team usually excelled at. We hit a major architectural crossroads. There were 2 paths we could take. Path A was Ron's proposal. It was based on a proven, stable technology stack. It was less exciting, but it was reliable. It would be a lot of work, but we knew it would be rock solid. Path B was a newer, trendier framework. It promised faster development time, but it was less mature and had a lot of known issues. It was a high-risk, high-reward option. Nathaniel was excited by it, but even he admitted it was a gamble. As a team, we discussed it. Ron laid out the case for stability and long-term maintenance. I agreed with him. For a core product, you don't take gambles. Adam, in his quiet way, pointed out that the new framework had security vulnerabilities that hadn't been patched yet. Even Nathaniel conceded that Ron's plan was the safer, more responsible choice. We presented our recommendation to Isabel in a planning meeting. We unanimously recommended Path A. I walked her through the reasoning, the risk analysis, the long-term benefits. She listened, nodding with a thoughtful expression. When I was done, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for that, Christopher. But I think we're going to go with Path B." The whole team was stunned. I asked her why. I asked if she could explain her reasoning, given the risks we had just outlined. She looked at all of us and delivered a line I will never forget. The team that built the original platform was all men. Path A feels like a continuation of that same exclusionary mindset. Path B is fresh, it's new. It represents a forward-thinking, more inclusive approach to technology. She had made a critical engineering decision based on her political ideology. She wasn't evaluating the technology. She was evaluating the perceived politics of the technology. Ron just stared at her, his face completely blank with disbelief. He tried to argue. He brought up the specific security issues Adam had found. He talked about the risk to the client's data. Isabel just waved her hand dismissively. Those are just details we can iron out. I'm more concerned with the big picture, with our team's vision. We need to break from the past. I tried to intervene. As team lead, it was my job to protect the project. I told her that this decision would put the entire deadline at risk. She looked me right in the eye. Are you saying you and your team are not capable of handling a challenge, Christopher? It was a trap, a loyalty test. If I said yes, I was admitting incompetence. If I said no, I was agreeing to her disastrous plan. I just said, we will do our best. The meeting ended. The decision was made. The mood in the office for the next few weeks was funereal. We were working on a project we all knew was doomed. We were building on a foundation of sand because our boss thought sand was more progressive than concrete. The work was a slog. Just as we predicted, the new framework was a nightmare. It was buggy, the documentation was terrible, and we spent more time fighting the tools than actually building the product. Nathaniel, who had initially been excited about the tech, was now the most stressed out. He felt responsible, even though it wasn't his decision. He was working 12-hour days just to keep up. Ron was apathetic. He did his work, did it well, but the passion was gone. He was just punching the clock. He had mentally checked out. Adam was getting hammered with support tickets because the unstable development environment kept crashing. Veronica was getting frustrated because she would design a feature, and we'd have to tell her it was impossible to build correctly with the broken tools we were forced to use. I spent most of my time in damage control mode, trying to shield the team from Isabel's constant meddling. She was now in full micromanager mode. She would hover over our desks, asking why we weren't using some new feature of the framework she'd read about in a blog post. She had no technical understanding, so we had to waste time explaining basic concepts to her. She started holding ideation sessions, where we were supposed to brainstorm more equitable code. We would sit in a room for 2 hours while she drew on a whiteboard, talking about how a login function could be less patriarchal. It was a complete and utter circus. Productivity plummeted. Morale was non-existent. The deadline was getting closer and closer, and we were falling further and further behind. I was working late one night, trying to refactor a piece of code that was falling apart for the 10th time. Ron was also there, packing up his desk. He came over to my cubicle and just stood there for a moment. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. He told me he'd been with the company for 15 years. He said he'd seen good managers and bad managers, but he'd never seen a manager who was actively trying to destroy their own project out of sheer ideological vanity. He said, "This isn't a tech company anymore, kid. It's a social experiment, and I'm too old for this." He didn't say anything else. He just patted me on the shoulder and left. It was that moment that I knew this wasn't sustainable. Something had to give. The team was breaking. I was breaking. The golden age was over. We were in the trenches now, and the enemy wasn't a competitor or a technical challenge. It was our own boss. The project became a death march. Every day felt like wading through mud. The unstable framework Isabel had chosen was throwing errors we'd never even seen before. We spent half our time just trying to get the development environment to run properly, let alone write new code. Adam was constantly putting out fires. The staging server would crash randomly, wiping out hours of work. He started looking perpetually exhausted, surviving on coffee and sheer willpower. Nathaniel was taking it the hardest. He was the one who had researched the new tech. He felt a personal responsibility for the mess, even though we all told him it was Isabel's call. He was pulling all-nighters, trying to find workarounds for the framework's fundamental flaws. Ron had fully entered a state of Zen-like detachment. He would come in, write his code, push it, and leave at 5 p.m. sharp. He did exactly what was asked of him, nothing more, nothing less. He stopped offering suggestions in meetings. He stopped pointing out potential problems. He was just a ghost in the machine, waiting for the clock to run out. Veronica's work was getting butchered. She would design these beautiful, user-friendly interfaces, and we'd have to come back to her and say, "Sorry, we can't build this." The framework was so restrictive that we had to cut corners everywhere. Rounded buttons became square. Smooth animations became clunky screen transitions. The product was starting to look and feel cheap, a pale imitation of her original vision. To her credit, she never blamed us. She knew where the problem was. She'd just sigh, say, "Okay, what can you build?" and go back to her design software to create a simplified, uglier version. Isabel, meanwhile, seemed completely oblivious to the technical reality. Her solution to our slow progress was more meetings. We had progress review meetings, synergy sessions, blocker breakdown meetings. Most of them were just her talking at us for an hour, showing us motivational slides she found online. She kept talking about agile methodology, but didn't seem to understand what it meant. For her, agile just meant she could change her mind about a major feature on a whim and expect us to implement it by tomorrow. During one particularly painful meeting, she asked why a certain feature was taking so long. I tried to explain, in simple terms, that the framework's data binding was inefficient and causing massive performance issues. She cut me off. She told me that she didn't want to hear excuses or technical jargon. She said what she was hearing was a can't-do attitude, and that the team needed to be more solution-oriented. She literally told me to stop explaining the problem and just solve it, the problem she had created, the problem she had forbidden us from avoiding. I just sat there, looking at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not frustration, just emptiness. The project was no longer a source of pride. It was an anchor, dragging us all down. As we got closer to the deadline, the pressure from upper management started to build. The director, our boss's boss from the main office, started asking for status reports. Isabel's reports were pure fantasy. She would take our percentage complete numbers, which were already generous, and inflate them. She filled her reports with buzzwords about the innovative new platform and how our team was embracing the future. She was building a narrative of success that had no connection to our daily nightmare. We all knew it was a ticking time bomb. We were heading for a spectacular crash, and she was the one driving the bus. The breaking point came a few weeks before the final deadline. The application's performance was so bad that it was practically unusable. We were desperately trying to optimize it, but it was like trying to make a turtle win a horse race. I did some research and found a potential solution, a third-party caching tool. It was a piece of software that was specifically designed to speed up applications like ours. It wasn't cheap, but it was a one-time license fee. Compared to the cost of the project failing and losing our biggest client, it was a drop in the bucket. I put together a proposal with a full cost-benefit analysis. I showed how it could save us weeks of manual optimization work and potentially salvage the launch. I scheduled a meeting with Isabel to present it. I walked her through the whole thing. I showed her the performance metrics, the user experience nightmare we were facing. I made the case as clearly and professionally as I could. She listened patiently, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, Christopher, but there's no room in the budget for this." I was floored. "Isabel, the project is on track to fail. This could save it." She gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind of smile a parent gives a child who doesn't understand. "We all have to tighten our belts. I'm sure you and the team can find a more creative in-house solution if you just think outside the box." There was no arguing with her. The decision was final. I walked back to my desk, defeated. I told the team the news. No one was surprised. It was just another log on the fire of our misery. We were being asked to perform a miracle, with our hands tied behind our backs. The very next day, an email went out to the entire department. It was from Isabel. The subject line was, announcing the first annual Women in Tech Empowerment Meetup. My blood ran cold as I read it. It was an invitation to an all-day event she was organizing and hosting. It was scheduled to take place in our main conference hall the following week. The email detailed a full agenda: guest speakers, networking sessions, a panel discussion on breaking the silicon ceiling. And at the bottom of the email, there was a line that made me see red. A fully catered lunch and refreshments will be provided. The project was on fire. The team was burning out. We were being denied critical resources due to budget constraints. And she had taken that same budget and used it to fund her own personal political rally. She wasn't just a bad manager, she was a hypocrite. She had betrayed the project, and she had betrayed the team. I looked up from my monitor. Ron was staring at his screen, slowly shaking his head. Nathaniel had his face in his hands. Adam was just staring into space, completely motionless. I looked over at Veronica. She caught my eye and just gave me a look that said, "This is it. This is the end." I didn't say a word. I just packed my bag, stood up, and walked out of the office. I needed air. I needed to think. I walked for a while, just trying to process the sheer audacity of it, the disrespect, the complete disregard for our work, our effort, our stress. It was all for nothing. Our project was just a piggy bank for her activism. That evening, I created a new private group chat. I invited Ron, Nathaniel, Adam, and Veronica. I sent one message: "The bar down the street, tomorrow after work. We need to talk." Everyone replied with a simple "I'm in" or a thumbs up emoji. The next day at work was tense. No one talked about the email, but it hung in the air like a thick fog. Isabel was walking around beaming, telling everyone how excited she was for her event. She was completely oblivious. She had no idea what she had done. After work, we all met at the bar. We found a quiet booth in the back. For a few minutes, nobody spoke. We just sat there, nursing our drinks. I decided to break the silence. "So," I said, "I'm done. I'm updating my resume tonight. I can't do this anymore." Ron took a long sip of his beer and let out a dry chuckle. "You're a little late to the party, kid. I've had my resume out for a month. Had 2 interviews last week." I looked at him, surprised. The old cynic had actually been serious. Nathaniel looked up from his drink. His voice was quiet. "I started looking after that toxic masculinity workshop. I can't have that on my record. I can't work for someone who thinks logic is a thought crime." I glanced at Adam. He wasn't a big talker, but he just gave a slow, deliberate nod. That was his yes. Then everyone looked at Veronica. She took a breath. "I wasn't sure how to tell you guys," she said. "I got a job offer on Tuesday. I was planning on giving my notice tomorrow." A wave of relief washed over me. We were all on the same page. We had all independently come to the same conclusion. This place was a sinking ship, and we were all smart enough to be looking for the lifeboats. We weren't a team being broken apart. We were a team escaping together. We talked for another hour, sharing our frustrations, our stories of Isabel's incompetence. It felt good to finally say it all out loud. It was validating. Then, an idea started to form in my mind. It was a crazy idea, but it also felt right. "Wait a minute," I said. "Veronica, you have an offer. Ron, you're close. Nathaniel, Adam, and I are all actively looking. What if we don't just leave?" Everyone looked at me, confused. "What if we coordinate?" I continued. "What if we all find new jobs and we all hand in our notice on the exact same day?" A slow grin spread across Ron's face. He understood immediately. "The project deadline is in 4 weeks, he said, the gears turning in his head. "If we all give our 2 weeks' notice, say, a week before the launch..." Nathaniel's eyes went wide. "She'd have a skeleton crew for the most critical phase of the project." "She'd have no one," Veronica corrected him. "We are the team. There is no one else. There's no one to hand the work over to." Adam, for the first time that night, spoke a full sentence. She would be completely, utterly screwed. The plan was born. It wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. It was about holding a terrible manager accountable in the only way we could. We were going to show the company the true cost of putting an ideologue in charge of a technical team. The mood shifted instantly. The despair was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. We had a mission. We spent the next 2 weeks in a state of covert operation. During the day, we were the same demoralized employees, going through the motions. But at night, we were a well-oiled job hunting machine. We reviewed each other's resumes. We sent each other job postings. We gave each other tips for interviews. I got an offer first, from a startup that seemed to value actual skills. Nathaniel got one a few days later, from a bigger, more established company. Ron, with his decades of experience, had his pick of several offers and chose the one with the best work-life balance. Adam, our quiet genius, got a high-paying gig at a data center, a place where he could work with servers in peace. We were all set. We had our escape routes planned. We chose a date, a Monday, exactly 9 days before the final project deadline. We called it D-Day, Departure Day. The countdown had begun. and Isabel had no idea that her entire world was about to come crashing down. The week leading up to D-Day was the strangest of my professional life. It felt like the last week of school before summer break. Outwardly, everything was normal. We attended the pointless meetings. We stared at our screens. We pushed code that we knew was broken. But inwardly, there was this electric current of anticipation running through the team. We would pass each other in the hallway and share a subtle nod or a knowing look. It was our secret, our silent pact. Isabel was more insufferable than ever. Her empowerment meetup had been a huge success, according to her. She spent an entire morning meeting telling us all about it, showing us pictures of her and her friends networking and eating catered sandwiches. She was high on her own supply, completely detached from the smoldering wreck of her actual responsibilities. The project was now in a state of critical failure. Key features were either missing or non-functional. The performance was abysmal. The whole thing was held together with digital duct tape and hope. Isabel's solution was to demand we all work the weekend before launch. She sent out a calendar invite for a mandatory launch readiness hackathon. It was the final insult, forcing us to sacrifice our personal time to fix the mess she single-handedly created. None of us even bothered to decline the invite. We just ignored it. It wouldn't matter. D-Day arrived. It was a gray, overcast Monday morning. I woke up that day with a strange sense of calm. There was no anxiety, no dread, just resolve. I put on my best shirt, made sure my letter of resignation was printed neatly, and put it in my bag. I got to the office. The others were already there, all with the same quiet, focused energy. We had our usual morning check-in meeting. We went around the circle, sharing our feelings. Feeling productive, Ron grunted. Feeling focused, Nathaniel said. Fine, Adam mumbled. Ready to tackle the day, Veronica added. I said I was looking forward to a productive week. Isabel beamed at us. That's the spirit, team. I love this positive energy. With this attitude, we can overcome any obstacle. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. We had agreed on the timing. After the meeting, one by one, I would go first. The meeting ended at 9:15 a.m. I walked back to my desk, picked up my letter, and walked over to Isabel's office. Her door was open. She was scrolling through her social media feed, smiling at her phone. I knocked gently on the doorframe. She looked up, her corporate smile snapping into place. Christopher, what can I do for you? I walked in and placed the letter on her desk, face up. Isabel, this is my 2 weeks' notice. I have accepted a position at another company. Her smile faltered. She looked at the letter, then back at me. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Well, she said, her tone dripping with passive aggression, this is certainly sudden. And not great timing with the launch so close. But if that's your decision, no one is irreplaceable. I just nodded. My last day will be in 2 weeks. I'll do my best to ensure a smooth transition. I turned and walked out of her office. As I walked past Ron's desk, he stood up. He had his own letter in his hand. He walked into her office without a word. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw him place his letter on top of mine and walk out. Now Isabel was no longer annoyed. She was confused. She stood up and looked out of her glass-walled office, watching Ron walk back to his desk. Just as she was processing what happened, Nathaniel got up. He walked in and placed his letter on the small but growing pile. Isabel's mouth was slightly open now. The confusion was turning into disbelief. Then Adam, our silent sysadmin, made his move. He walked in, placed his letter down, and walked out, all without a single word. He was a ninja of resignation. Isabel was now staring at the pile of 4 letters. Her face was pale. She looked like she was trying to solve a complex math problem in her head and failing. Then came the final blow. Veronica stood up. She walked into the office and placed her letter on the very top of the pile. I watched Isabel's face go through a rapid series of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, anger, and then, finally, pure, undiluted panic. Her eyes darted around the room, from the letters on her desk to the faces of her entire core team, all of whom were now quietly packing their personal belongings. She finally found her voice. "What is this?" she stammered, walking out of her office. "Is this some kind of joke?" No one answered. The sound of keyboards being unplugged and desk drawers being emptied was the only reply. "You can't all quit," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "The launch is next week. This is unprofessional. It's sabotage." Ron, who was putting a small plan into a cardboard box, finally looked at her. "We're all giving our standard 2 weeks' notice, as per our contracts," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's perfectly professional." "But why?" she pleaded, looking from face to face. "I don't understand." That was the thing. She genuinely didn't understand. In her world, she was the hero. She was the one bringing progress and enlightenment. She couldn't comprehend that her actions had consequences, that her ideology had driven away every single person who did the actual work. She looked at me, her eyes wide with desperation. "Christopher, you're the team lead. You have to stop this." "I've already resigned, Isabel," I said calmly. "There's nothing to stop." She started to panic for real now. She ran back into her office, grabbed her phone, and we could hear her frantically calling HR. "They're all quitting! The whole team! Yes, all at once. You have to do something. Can you refuse to accept their resignations?" We just kept packing. HR apparently told her what we already knew. They couldn't force us to work there. Her next call was to the director, her boss. We couldn't hear all of it, but we heard snippets. "I don't know what happened. They just all turned against me. It's a coordinated attack. The project is going to fail." She was trying to frame herself as the victim. By the time we were ready to leave, she was just sitting at her desk, staring into space, her face ashen. She had lost control, and the realization was finally hitting her. The 5 of us walked out of that office together. We didn't look back. We went to the same bar where we had hatched the plan and ordered a round of drinks. It wasn't a celebration, it was more like a release. The weight was finally lifted. For the next 2 weeks, we served out our notice period. It was a farce. Isabel avoided us. She wouldn't even make eye contact. She tried to hire contractors to replace us, but the learning curve for the project was massive. No one could get up to speed in 2 weeks, especially with the broken codebase. We spent our time documenting our work as best we could, but it was like writing an instruction manual for a car that had no engine. On our last day, the director flew in from the main office. He called each of us into a conference room for an exit interview. He was a sharp guy. He knew something was deeply wrong. We didn't badmouth Isabel. We didn't need to. We just stated the facts, professionally and calmly. We talked about the technical decisions that were forced on us. We mentioned the mandatory workshops that destroyed morale. We pointed out the project budget being used for non-project activities. We laid out a clear, factual timeline of incompetence. By the time he interviewed the 5th of us, Veronica, his face was grim. He knew the truth. We cleaned out our desks, handed in our key cards, and walked out of that building for the last time. A month later, we all met up for dinner. We were all happier in our new jobs. The stress was gone. We were back in environments where our skills were valued and our work mattered. During dinner, Veronica got a text from a friend who still worked at the old company. She read it out loud to us. The project launch had been a complete catastrophe. It was so broken that they had to roll back the release after just a few hours. The company had lost its biggest client as a result, and Isabel had been fired. The director had come down himself, and she was escorted out of the building that same afternoon. We all just sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. Justice had been served, not through shouting or HR complaints, but through quiet collective action. We had simply removed ourselves from an impossible situation, and the house of cards she had built came tumbling down on its own. We raised our glasses. Ron proposed a toast. "To competence," he said. We all drank to that.